All right, so welcome back to another episode of Pediatrics Unplugged. Today we have the pleasure of welcoming a very special guest, a renowned lactation expert and founder of Milk Diva, Naiomi Catron. Today's episode, breastfeeding is a natural process, but does that mean that you should just wing it? Naiomi is going to talk about why preparation and support are key to successful breastfeeding.
Hello
Welcome,
there. Thank you
Naomi.
so much.
Yeah,
Thanks for having me.
welcome. Yeah, thank you. Hey, I was going to ask you, you said that you were a labor and delivery nurse. Did you always think or know that you were going to go into lactation, or was that something that you discovered along the way?
That's a really good question. Most labor and delivery nurses view lactation and postpartum as being boring and slow, and it's definitely not like a thing that labor nurses aspire to be. And I do really believe that this is divine intervention. I was ride or die labor and delivery. I love it. I still love it. But when you're a labor and delivery nurse, you also get complex postpartum patients. And so I was working on an antepartum unit, taking care of complex postpartum patients. And they kept giving me all the patients who wanted to breastfeed, but were having difficulties and maybe babies were in NIC unit. Or they had difficult births, preeclampsia, ICU admissions. And the patients would tell me like, hey, you're the first one who's been able to help me. And I've been here for 6 days. Like you should do this as a business. And after I've heard that a couple of times, something clicked and I do feel like God changed my heart and was like, you should do this as a business. And so that was in fall of one year, like fall of 2018, I think. And then I got my IBCLC, did all my certifications and was in practice in June. So less than 6 months later. And so that's how it happened. I didn't expect it to happen like that, but it was a desire that was put on my heart. And just suddenly I just ran with it. And that was like 6 years ago.
Yeah, I always love people's origin stories because a lot
Yeah.
of times we end up places where we never expected to end up.
Well, that's why I try to tell my kids right now who are going through the college phase. It's like, try not to freak out so much about what your major is in the classes and like what college you're going to, because life has a way of many people are in jobs and careers that they didn't go to school for. Maybe not you guys, because you have to really be a lot more um, poignant with how you spend your time, 8 years plus residency. But people who are not in medicine, a lot of times have jobs and careers that they didn't start off in.
Yes, and
Yeah.
even this model is totally different than what we thought we would be in, a
Right.
direct
That's true.
model versus insurance. So yeah,
Yeah, that's true.
happen.
Yeah, and I was in the emergency room for a while until I found Dr. G, who was
Yes.
had a phenomenal pride. My wife actually, one day she was on Lady Docs and said, "Oh, would you like this job?" And I'm like, "Yeah, if I can get it, that would be awesome."
You'll live longer. Like working in the ER is really we're humans, we're not robots. And the things that you see and the fast pace and like the lack of like I couldn't hardly eat lunch or go to the restroom. And after a while, like I was like, I feel like I have a hangover the next day after work. And I was like, you have an adrenaline rush, right? But I was like, I can't be an adrenaline addict. Like that's probably not good for me. Um, so yeah.
That's awesome. Okay, so this was actually your topic, which I thought was a wonderful topic. So, what do you mean when you say winging it?
Yeah.
Okay, so winging it. So I vividly remember when I first started my practice, I was clearly friends with a lot of obstetricians in town. And they told me, they were like, and I've always had a prenatal virtual class. And they said to me, wow, what a brilliant idea. And especially during COVID, great idea, right? But they said to me, I can never get my patients to take a prenatal breastfeeding class. They're really interested in birthing classes and hospital tours, but very, very few of them take prenatal breastfeeding classes. And I was like, wow, that's really interesting. Let me see if I can make that different. Let me see if my marketing or whatever, my product that I have will change that statistic. But no, it did not change that statistic. Um, and I will tell you that 90% of the calls that we get are reactive calls, meaning to say, hey, I just had a baby. I'm having trouble breastfeeding, or my doctor said I should call you to get a lactation consultation. That is an example of weighing it. That's kind of like, hey, I'm thinking about I'm pregnant, I'm having a baby. I'm really focused on picking the nursery, picking the stroller, picking the doula, picking the wallpaper, picking the stuff that you need for my baby registry, and then like picking what I'm going to wear in birth and picking what I want the birth to be like. And maybe bottles, people pick bottles, right? And pump parts, and they do all the research on that. and a birth photographer and all that. But then they're like, well, breastfeeding is natural. So I'll just call if I need help. Like I'll figure that out once the baby comes. That's what I mean by winging it. That is probably not the best recommendation if you can't tell in my voice.
Yeah. Tell me more about the prenatal breastfeeding classes.
We have, so I generally, as a rule of thumb, don't like to chat about things that you can learn on Google or on a podcast, even though I have a podcast and you have a podcast. So I don't like to teach your basic prenatal classes. That's super boring for me. So I don't teach the basics of breastfeeding. I think you can take a lot of those kind of courses from Dr. Google. So what I do have is a virtual prenatal course that's self-paced you have access to for 9 months. You can share it with your family. And it's not just me talking, it's actually through a company, really amazing 4D animations showing you there's a birth class and there's a breastfeeding class showing you the whole lactation process, what diapers should look like, different positions, testimonials from patients with things have gone great, things they should watch out for, how much milk baby should have, and like all of the things that you would find in a typical breastfeeding class, that's done digitally. You can do it on your own. And it's, like I said, it's not something that I could ever see myself doing over and repeating over and over again. But what I have found that actually is in a lot of demand that people love is what I call like insider secrets to breastfeeding. And so it's all the things you don't usually learn at a typical prenatal breastfeeding class, whether it's held from a childbirth educator or a doula, because it's from the perspective of a labor and delivery nurse and lactation consultant. So I was doing those classes virtually one-on-one for the last 6 years, and people love them. And I was like, well, let's just make this into a group class. So now we're rolling out an actual in-person, because people want to do more interactive group, small group learning. So we're doing them like we have a location in Lakeway, we have a location in Southwest Austin. Once a month, we're doing this class, and it's called Not Your Ordinary Breastfeeding Class. And that's what it is. There is the first 30 minutes or so are going to be basics that you need to know that you might find in a normal class. And then we give you videos and PDFs and all the things resource wise. But then we spend the next hour basically going into all the things no one tells you. And so this is where you guys come in, because what I want always is for the patient, the lactation consultant, the providers, the nurses to figure out a way to work together as opposed to being opposed to each other. So I think it's important that a breastfeeding parent understands, hey, if your baby has jaundice, your desire to strictly breastfeed can still be achieved. However, there may be a brief period in time where things might look a little different. And this is what I mean. And so I will teach them what to expect. That way we have higher compliance with the parents being willing to supplement and understand their baby is sleepy and may not have the energy to directly breastfeed, but also get that baby out of that jaundice quicker so he or she can return back to the breast. I think if people don't know and expect that that's a curve that could happen in their story, some people are fight, flight, or freeze. And when they're put in that stressful situation, could be really resistant to a doctor's recommendation of supplementation or things like that. So I just want my patients to know, hey, these are some of the things that could happen. And I want you to feel equipped to make an informed decision, and also know not to freak out. We can still help breastfeeding get back on track as long as we work together really early in the postpartum period. So that's kind of what my prenatal classes are about.
Yeah, it reminds me a little bit of tips and tricks on the iPhone. You know the basics of the iPhone, but then tips and tricks come up and you're like, oh, I had no idea about this.
Right. And it can make your
Yeah.
life a lot easier if you had, like, oh, I didn't know it can do that. Or like when it comes to, like, people don't really know how to best utilize, like what hill to die on, basically.
Mhm.
Especially it depends if you're having a home birth, if you're having a hospital birth, and then which hospital is it going to be at? Like that's something, how would you know what their policies are? I just happen to have worked at both of the major hospital systems in town. So I know like what their blood sugar levels, what their parameters are, like who has donor breast milk for well babies versus donor breast milk only for NICU babies. And those are just important things I think to know.
Yeah, and I really like your idea of the team approach, because I think it's best for the parents. I think it's best for the baby to have people work on their behalf as a team.
Yeah, it's definitely, I remember being a labor nurse and me being and feeling like it was the patient coming in with a doula and I was the outsider enemy. And it took a whole 12-hour shift to build that trust, to be like, hey, I'm actually on your side and I have nothing but the best intentions for you. And I really want to make your plan, your desires come true. But I need to do that within the hospital policies that we have. Like I can't rewrite policies. And luckily, it never was a big issue for me. But I think it's also important for us in the outpatient world to help the parents understand why their pediatrician might be making some recommendations. But also, I love that I can call you guys and if there was something that I was concerned about and discuss it directly with you, as opposed to being put on hold for an hour and getting an assistant, and maybe my message may or may not get through.
No, I agree. And within that direct primary care, there is direct access to us. We have nobody nurse or nurse practitioner or anybody in between you and us, which I like too.
Yeah, that's why you can text me or I could text you and we can chat about an actual human patient and actually be able to give, like we can put our brain together and then kind of make a recommendation that's going to be beneficial for that individual family, because people don't
Yeah.
realize it's not a blanketed approach. It's not like a cookie cutter approach. You really need to consider what's their family support look like? Was that baby born at 37 weeks or 41 weeks? Does the mom have gestational diabetes? Does the mom going back to work at 2 months or at 2 years? Does she have 3 kids at home, or is this her first baby? And so the plan needs to be customized on all of those things.
Yes,
Yeah.
it's really important for individualized care because every child is unique. And so being able to, talk with you and the families and as a team help support the mom and the babies. It's so important.
Yeah.
Sure.
I mean, I was thinking this morning, the problem with our population, like when I had my kids, I had never really been to the doctor before because you're young and you're healthy, right? But I am not young and healthy anymore. And so I go to the doctor. And so you have to go see specialists. And I don't know if our audience would know this, but whenever you need to see a specialist in Austin, there's a wait. Like I had to make a dermatology appointment and I have to wait till February of 2025 to get in
Oh my gosh.
for dermatology appointment. So I say that, and this is when it comes back to your question about winging it. Lactation consultants are considered specialists. There's very few lactation consultants in this country. We have the most out of the whole world, but I mean, compared to pediatricians or any other specialty, there's not a lot of lactation consultants. And then remember, each of our visits is about an hour and a half long. So in an 8-hour day, we can't really see more than 5 patients, and that's a busy, busy day. So if you expect to have a baby and just like, oh, I'll just call, like, and that someone will get me in, well, you must pause and ask yourself, if you don't have any patients, are you good? Like, why don't you have any patients? Why do you have immediate openings?
Mhm.
So our practice usually has about a 2-week wait list. And so what we recommend is people call us or go online, book their appointment while they're pregnant still. And we just ask them to book their appointment for 1 week past their due date. And then we can usually move it around later or earlier just based on what happens in their, whenever their baby decides to come, as opposed to winging it and just hoping they're going to call. Because in the same way, my mouth fell to the floor when they told me I have to wait till next year for a dermatology appointment. Your baby and your nipples cannot wait that, usually can't wait 2 weeks to see a lactation consultant. And so that's where that whole winging it thing comes. And even for us women who like, we get our hair colored and cut and all that. And when we make that appointment, when we have our color and cut, we make our next appointment for 8 weeks later, right then and there. Because if not, your hairdresser is not going to fit you in. And that's your hair. Like this is your baby's whole liveliness is feeding them. And so that's why I think it's really important to kind of like put the breastfeeding support like really, really high on the birth prep, not just hospital tours and like taking a childbirth class, but like, hey, you got to feed your baby. They got to thrive. That has to be top of the list.
Yeah, that's a really good
Right. And I
point.
think, oh, sorry. Yeah. And I think just, on top of that too, when I had my very first baby, fortunately I had some education on breastfeeding, but, the nurses just throw the baby on. You think like babies can teach themselves how to eat. You're like, you should come out knowing how to eat, right? But they just throw the baby on and they'll say, lactation will come tomorrow or later in the evening. And you just kind of have to wing it and figure it out. So yeah, knowing how the different positions are having to latch will be really beneficial for families, especially delivering in the hospital if you don't have a support right away.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it seems like being in the hospital, it just, the way babies and moms are in the hospital usually for 2 days maximum. It's not a whole lot of time to work with the parent or
Right.
mother.
Well, the baby's also totally asleep. If you think about it, our population who's delivering in the hospital are getting magnesium and like just things are happening. And so their baby's still asleep basically. And milk is still in that transition period. I also think, common question that I get is how do I know my baby's getting enough? And that's a really hard question to answer in the first few days of life. And that's one of the things that our patients who work with us prenatally, I feel like are very, very well equipped to manage is, hey, if I'm not sure my baby's getting enough at the breast during these first couple days when they're really asleep and maybe I don't have a robust milk supply yet, they're equipped with the tools needed to ensure their baby's getting enough calories despite maybe not their baby being too sleepy and not having nutritive sucking at the breast. Because sometimes they get there and they'll give you like 2 or 3 sucks and then they like fall asleep. And so we equip them how to overcome that so that they're not having to stay longer or having their baby, have 9, 10, 11% weight loss. I think that's really key for the first couple days.
So scheduling that breastfeeding appointment ahead of time, that's a great tip and trick. What's another tip?
Things like lactation, prenatal consultation for sure, or lactation class. I think it's important to make sure the class is going to cover things you can't learn on Dr. Google. I think it's important, please, everyone who's listening, if you don't remember anything else today, 2 things is please don't get a hands-free pump as your primary pump. So they have a lot of cool pumps out that you can like go now and walk around town and pump and people may not know you're pumping. That is not the pump that you need for when your baby is first born. Those pumps are not appropriate for the first 12 weeks of life. Those pumps are much more appropriate after the first 3 months of life on occasional use, really, really dependent on your milk supply. So you need to work with a lactation consultant that can help you select the best hands-free pump for you in the future. It really is really dependent on how robust your milk supply is. So that'll be one of my like tips. I had another tip and I can't remember what it was right now.
Yeah, that was a really good point because I just had a mother who primary pump is a hand pump initially, and for I think that baby was 3 or 4 days old.
The hand pump, like the one you squeeze like this?
Yeah, I don't know. She didn't show me.
So then they have, I have it in my other room. I have a Haka, which is a silicone pump. That's also not one that you're going to want to use in the first few weeks of life either. So yeah, I think people are really, really, really fascinated with stuff like gadgets and equipment. And breastfeeding is not really about the gadgets and equipment. I remember what I was going to say. My next important tip, if you don't remember anything else, is to visit this website called firstdroplets.com. And it's from a pediatrician. I'll pull up her name. You'll recognize her name as soon as I say it. That is almost everything, you might need to know to help get your baby nutrition in the first couple of days. Let's see what her name is. I can't remember right now, but yeah, firstdroplets.com. I love that webpage. So don't get a hands-free pump and then go to firstdroplets.com if you want to breastfeed. That's a really, really amazing resource for you. But the silicone
the hand-free pump, you mean the electric, like Willow and those types of things? Is that what you're talking about? Yeah. Yes. They have a huge learning curve. So it is difficult.
A huge learning curve. Sizing is a little challenging. Right. So we need to get you, like, if you're going to pump, it's not just like put on a pump and let's roll. Like it's like a shoe size, like the flange that comes in the box right now is going to be about a 24 and a 28. And just as a point of reference, you can use a size 28 on a pony. I don't know if you knew that, but that fits a pony's nipple. And it's Dr. Jane Morton is the creator of the First Droplets website. So when it comes to flanges, what comes in the box may not be your size. but also what size you are in the hospital might be like you're swollen a little bit from the water weight. So a couple days after, once you get that water weight off and we can actually measure you for your true size, that would probably be really helpful. So all of our lactation consultants walk around with a whole variety of flange sizes, not just the measuring piece and not the silicone inserts, but the actual plastic flanges. And we will put like a size 12 on this size or 13 on this size and a 15 on this size. And we'll make sure like when your nipple is pulled that we measure it for elasticity, fit, and comfort. So I think when and if you decide to pump, getting the right pump is important for you, and then the right flanges. So staying away from the hands-free pump, Mom Cozy. They have is it the LV Stride now, Willow? It doesn't matter what the name of the brand is, the kind that you can just wear and walk around the house, and they have like curved type shell inserts are just not appropriate for the first 3 months of life, unless it's your 5th kid and you have like tons of milk.
So, what do you recommend for mothers who it's the second, third, fourth day at home and they're really struggling with breastfeeding, but your wait is 2 weeks? Are there any resources or recommendations you have for them?
Well, if there are patients, so if there were our prenatal patient, for example, they would have gone and we can resend them. I have basically a 10-minute survival guide video, and it is a step-by-step video on what they need to do to help protect their milk supply and help feed and grow their baby until they're waiting for their lactation consultation. So if you're our prenatal patient, we give that to you for free, and it is meant to tie you over. We also give you a newborn feeding cheat sheet, and that also has tons of QR codes and links, and it's all about like, for example, I just did a prenatal consultation, so I have like all of these bottles, and I will explain to them when it's like what kind of a bottle nipple, how to bottle feed in a manner that complements breastfeeding, what kind of bottles to stay away from, like this one, stay away from this one, and why. Because if they're struggling, usually at day 2, 3, 4 of life, it's usually going to be like, hey, my pediatrician said my baby's losing weight, but I can't get him to stay awake at the breast. Would you agree? Is that kind of what you're noticing with your babies that are less than a week old?
Yeah, I would say, they're pretty sleepy. They went through either a traumatic or just a long labor, especially if it's a first-time baby. And so they are pretty sleepy. And so getting them up is going to be really important because they do lose weight. And depending if mom, you had mentioned too, whatever she received, if she received a lot of IV fluids, you may have, a larger birth weight than the reality. So I take into account that as well. But yeah, I would say they're pretty sleepy within the first, week or two.
Yeah. I love that you said that. I wish they would start weighing the babies like 4 hours after birth because they're so edematous. They're like little marshmallows when we first get them. What were you going to say, Dr. Whitaker?
Oh, I was going to ask, do you find that mothers that had C-sections, does their breast milk come in a little bit slower or?
That's a great question. I think age has a lot more to do with it. So actually I have a podcast episode, maybe like 3 episodes ago. I don't know what episode it is, but it's about hormones and milk supply. And so the challenge that we're having is we're not in our 20s anymore having our babies. And so we're in our mid 30s, late 30s, early 40s. And your hormones have a lot more to do with your milk onset than anything else. Yes, the studies say C-section and diabetes and things like that will cause a delay in the milk to come in. In real life, though, it's hard for me to say a statement like that because we're not teasing out their age. And so if you're 21 and you have a C-section, like I don't really see a delay. But if you're 38 and you have a C-section, did you have a delay because of the C-section or because you're 38? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I understand.
And then also we're having babies born a lot more at 37 weeks. A lot of inductions earlier and you see how, so for me, I personally feel like those other factors are much more indicative of milk supply and stress, of course, than like actually C-section or actual diabetes. Like people say like, this is real life. I promise I'm not making this up, but we had a patient with a breast reduction less than 5 years ago. And that's a really high risk for making low milk supply. And the lactation consultant who had her is a very seasoned lactation consultant. She's a NICU nurse. She's been doing, IBCLC for years and years and years. This mom was making 90 ounces of milk per day.
Oh.
And so
It's
we had like
incredible.
hyperlactation thing going on, and we could not understand, like it was just,
Interesting.
that's not what you expect. So it's hard for me to like, I have just, I can tell you some hard numbers of things I see like in the tongue tie world. I do a lot of that. But when it comes to generalization of like those kinds of things, it's hard for me to say because there's so many variables that come in. But I do think age is a really, really big variable that we may not consider. That we also, it's kind of rude to say, hey, you're 35. This is why we're having some problems with milk supply. But that is more likely some of the cause of lower or slower milk onset.
Okay, so along the lines of winging it again, how hard is it to get into a prenatal?
Prenatal is not hard at all. So
Yeah.
prenatal digital class or virtual class, people can book, you can book 100 of them right now. If, like there could
Oh,
be 100
perfect.
people who can book up right now. And that part's easy. And the cool part with that is it comes with a 30-minute virtual consultation with me afterwards to answer any questions you have or to go over some. People a lot of times don't know what questions to ask because this is their first experience. So that part is super scalable. The in-person classes, we do them once per month in 2 different locations. There's 5 spots in each location. So it's 5 couples. So it's 10 people in each location. And so you basically want to start thinking about taking a prenatal in-person class in your second trimester. So 28 weeks, go ahead, book your class. Even earlier, if you're 20 weeks and you want to book your class for 2-3 months from now, you can hop online and you can do that easily. So it just depends what's more convenient for them. One of the classes, I think in Lakeway, that one is done on Saturday mornings. And then the one that's going to be over by the Y in Oak Hill, that's going to be done on Monday evenings after work. So yeah, there's 3 options there. I just think it's important for people to plan ahead because feeding is so, so, so important. And I also think it's important for people to know, which this is one of the main drivers for me making my brand and hiring people the way that I do, is a lot of people think that lactation consultants, or maybe it's just me that thought this, I felt very judged if I was going to use a pacifier, a bottle, or formula, or if I wanted to sleep at night, or if I wanted to pump and bottle feed. And it's unfortunate that that has been the experience of some people, but I love our team because if you want a bottle feed, hey, let's do a bottle feeding plan. If you want a formula feed, we can help you pick a formula that's going to be most easily metabolized by your baby based on their age and their situation. If your baby has food allergies or sensitivities, I don't want to say food allergies, but if you have a history of food sensitivities and your other kiddos did, and you want to kind of explore that with us, we can do that with you too. And I don't think that we should be shaming people in or out of certain things that they want to do based on their lifestyle. And people sometimes get advice like, always do this and never do this. And I just say people should run from that kind of advice. So there should be, you can't say pacifiers always sabotage breastfeeding or bottles always sabotage breastfeeding. It's just not how it works. So I try to stay away from always and never statements. And so when people are considering, like, do I want to take a prenatal class? I think it's important that they know it does depend who they're taking it with. And having a broader global view of infant feeding is important, that they should never be shamed into breastfeeding, if that makes sense.
That makes sense.
Yeah, it's a very challenging path already for moms just having a new baby. And so finding a place where they can make those decisions and feel supported is super important. So I love that you do that.
Yeah, I like that too. It's more of a middle way.
And if you have like a couple, like if you have 2 and 3 kids at home, what you did in your first journey might look different than this journey because of all the things you have. Or if your husband or partner is traveling for work, or you had a NICU baby, like you kind of have to be a realist on what you can do while protecting your mental health. Because this is a marathon, not a sprint, is what I tell people. So you can't come out of the gate running like it's a sprint because you're going to run out of steam. We really need to pace ourselves. And the lactation process is not like a 1 visit, 1 shot, 1 kill kind of thing. It is several visits you should budget for, just like you would budget for a doula. Sometimes it's covered by insurance, sometimes it's not. But I promise you, you will not regret the investment that you make in your infant feeding journey. And it's much cheaper than getting years and years of therapy for wishing, coulda, woulda, shouldas for whatever happened in your breastfeeding journey,
Yeah. All right. One last question. Are there any other common misconceptions that mothers may have about breastfeeding? I think you hit it with the bottle and the pacifier. Those were
Bottles,
good ones.
I think people think bottles are going to ruin breastfeeding. I think that's a misnomer, not true. It's a myth. I think there's a right way and a wrong way to use a bottle. So I'm not saying that there's, babies are smart. They want to go to the path of least resistance. They will go where the flow is faster